another episode of Inside the Recording Studio. I am Jody Whitesides, and with me, as always, is Mr. Chris Hellstrom. How are you today, Chris?
Your creativity astounds me, Jody.
Why is that?
Well, we'll get to that. Okay. But no, I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. It's been a long morning, and I'm ready to get rolling here.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So why am I laughing?
Why are you laughing? I would assume it's because I slammed the door shut as I was doing the hello, along with tapping the counter in front of me with a soda can, making noise.
That's right.
And what are we talking about today?
So we're talking about cleaning up audio files.
Which I obviously didn't do for the podcast.
Yet. Well, if you do that, it would kind of ruin the joke, wouldn't
it
you?
Would. Yes, it would.
Cleaning up audio is something that we say a lot.
Do we?
In the podcast. Yeah,
okay.
We talk about cleaning up as before we go into mix and all this stuff.
Sure.
It's obviously part of the workflow and perhaps deserves a looking glass into whatever the heck we're talking about when we're saying that. So that's what we're yapping about today.
All right. What are we starting off with here?
First off, it's a little bit of a caveat, I think, to this. And that's, of course, this doesn't really apply if you're using mainly samples. Right? So if you're using like sample libraries and things, this is kind of unlikely to happen to you or something that you might not even think about. It's a good idea to know how to do it should you find yourself in need of doing so. This is essentially just issues that kind of pop into our productions when we're dealing with whether we're recording a vocalist or recording instruments. In other words, putting a mic on something and capturing the audio.
Right. So this wouldn't really apply to software instruments either, generally speaking.
No. Generally speaking, no. No, it's the same kind of idea. Obviously, if you have a synth that's just a software synth, it's very unlikely to have artifacts in it. Mm-hmm. But if you have something, let's say that it's a sample library, it's completely possible that something can squeak in there. You know, if you have an orchestral library or whatever, you might hear something. But in those cases, it's just part of the charm. So I'm not going to worry about that.
Okay, understood. So this is essentially when we are miking up instruments or vocals, and there are extraneous things that we did not mean to capture.
Correct. Yeah, and of course, this is also best to deal with if you're noticing it at the time of recording. Mm-hmm. If we are not noticing them, or let's say, for example, we're receiving tracks from somebody else, there might be certain issues with the audio that we definitely want to take care of before we start mixing.
Right.
Because, yes, it makes our job as mixers a heck of a lot easier and not problem solve while we're doing that. We've talked about that ad nauseum at different points, so I think we'll skip the soapbox speech on that. When we're talking about issues, what kind of issues are you thinking about when we're saying like cleaning up audio?
Well, I will say this. There's at least 4 categories of noise that could happen in your recording. And the first was an example that happened on the intro as of today. Me slamming a door shut while I was saying hello and then tapping a soda can on my desk as I was still doing it. And then again, while we were talking, just to make rise of the fact that there's noise going on in here as I was doing that. Non-musical noise is what I'm getting at here. And that is things like door noises, floor squeaks, any extra room noise, or maybe you kick the mic stand at the same time. That's a non-musical thing. Or you kick something and you cause a crash, boom, bam, or something of that nature. That is a non-musical noise, generally speaking. And those are things most often not really desired in the middle of your mix.
Indeed. And while we're more susceptible to these kind of things, if we're tracking things at home or in somebody's garage or whatever we're doing, these are likely to happen, right? But that doesn't mean that it doesn't happen if you're in a major studio or you're trying to capture large ambiances and things like that. It's very easy that we can get the floor squeaks and things of that nature and want to get rid of those bad boys.
Well, so even more prominent things that could happen that aren't necessarily musically related. That could happen in a normal studio or in your bedroom studio. A large truck going by for low-end rumble can definitely sneak in there unless you are completely isolated from the ground and the world outside.
Yeah, those things can be really annoying, and they would tend to rear their ugly heads once you start perhaps applying a little compression to the room mics for your drum kit or whatever, and you start hearing like, what was that? Well, that was the truck driving by that one day. Right? There you go. Very annoying things. Other things I'm thinking about, and this is something that you've mocked me for in the past, but it's kind of like vocal noises.
Yeah.
Lip smacks, swallowing, could be during a take or in between lines of a vocalist, could be bothersome breathing things.
Sure.
And things like clearing a throat before you do the next line or whatever.
Yes.
So those are things, and I tend to not necessarily clear my throat, but I still have to breathe, but I'm also one to perhaps have a little extraneous lip smacking noise. Hopefully you don't hear that because Jody's very good at editing those out.
I do my best.
Yeah. Here's something that obviously is you're pretty much guaranteed to have happen as you're tracking a vocalist because we're human, right? And there will be breaths before a line, or if you're singing longer passages and you're singing an entire chorus or whole verse or perhaps even a whole song, there has to be breaths in there. And I know we've talked about it a little bit in the past, but maybe we should just kind of do a revamp of like, how do you treat breaths in a vocal? Is it a complete no-no for you, or how do you treat them?
Are you talking in a song mix or a podcast edit?
No, I'm talking about a song because that's kind of what we're talking about, I think. Yeah.
Sure. The idea is, how annoying is it? Oftentimes, a lot of people will edit out pretty much all the breaths. They just want to make it like they're a perfect human robot singing without the ability to actually breathe. It's as if you have an infinite reservoir of air within your lungs and you don't have to breathe ever. And that's unrealistic. There are some artists, or at least some songs by some artists in the past, where the breaths are actually accentuated because they are part of the performance. And I can even posit, I can't remember the title of the song right now, but there is at least one song that I've heard where the breathing is an integral part of the recording and is in a rhythmic value to the recording. And it makes it important because of that.
Yeah, because I tend to be careful with breaths because, as you say, if you completely remove them,
you're inhuman.
You record. It sounds sterile. It sounds unnatural. And if you're going for that, cool. That's probably the way to go. But if you have something where you want to have a little bit more of an emotional thing, let's say that it's like an R&B or a soul-y thing, but even in rock and stuff, having a little bit of the breath there is, I think, imperative to the performance. It would just be annoying if before every line you hear, right? And then you're adding compression to that, and now it ruins everything.
Like I said, that is dependent also upon the song and the singer. I can think of at least a Journey song or two where Steve Perry is just accentuating the living bejesus out of the breathing before a vocal.
Yeah. No, but I mean, but in certain cases like him, and I know there's an old song with David Coverdale, which is a soulful type of a thing. And because of the compression that is on his vocal as well, it's like, it sounds like the world championship in breathing, right? But it adds to the song. It doesn't sound like distracting. In any other circumstance, it probably would.
Sure.
But also, we're talking about recordings here that were done before Pro Tools and stuff.
Yep.
In those cases, if you're tracking with a compressor going in, well, guess what? They're there unless you're going to do a whole lot of automation. That's kind of like a different thing today where we can kind of go back and minimize those and take those out.
Sure. And there's multiple methods to doing that. But what's another type of noise that we would want to remove beyond the vocals?
I'm thinking instrument noises, and my initial thing is guitar.
Okay.
Or it could be guitar squeaks from moving from one position to the next. And the bane of every guitar player's existence, especially if you're a Strat player, it's like 60 cycle hum.
Yeah.
That type of stuff, right? Yeah. But also, I mean, it could be things like a drummer has a squeaky pedal.
Yeah, get some oil on that bad boy, damn it.
Yeah. Here's obviously something that you would ideally notice at the tracking stage.
Before you even tracked it, you should be doing it during the setup phase.
You would hope.
One would hope, yes.
It's those kind of things. It could be low-end rumble, things that might not be super obvious as you're recording it. Things like you might have an air conditioner going in the background or something, or a heater if you're in such a climate, and those things that are just like present there. And you might not think about it when you're in the room because it's just part of the ambience of the room. But once you're tracked in that and you got those spaces where it's like, oh my God, that I wish we would have noticed that, but now we can get rid of it, that type of thing.
Well, and that would also apply to things like piano when you have the pedal squeaks of the piano and such.
Yeah.
And things of that nature, or even the hammerings of the keys. Sometimes people want that, sometimes they don't.
Yeah. And that's something that, depending on, you mentioned sampled instruments and stuff, where in certain piano libraries, those things are actually sampled for the sort of realism. I'm one of those people that drives me up the wall when I hear those little, not necessarily release triggers and things like that adds to the realism depending on what it is that you're doing. But when you're constantly hearing like the player shift in his chair or something like that, and because there are libraries that have that in there, hyper realistic, but for me, I'm not so happy with those.
Right. And there's another category of noise here that we can pay attention to, and it's when you make edits, you can introduce noise in your edits, and that can be problematic. More specifically, a lot of the time, if you're editing from region to region in a DAW and you're not thinking about the crossfades that happen between those regions, you can have hard jumps, which can create a digital.
Oh, it's the worst. Yeah, definitely. So those are things that obviously most of the time, that's just a simple crossfade will do it. If you're a little bit more on the newer side, you might not even think about those things. And you notice that where are those clicks and pops coming from? And chances are that they're from those. So those are a little bit more of the byproduct of editing, obviously, as opposed to the recording process. Those bad boys need to be taken care of.
That they do. Now that we've discussed several different types of noises that we can encounter when it comes to tracking and when you're given multi-tracks to mix with, or even stems for that matter. Boy, if they're in the stems, slay the person that does that to you. The question becomes, how do we deal with these things? What is your favorite thing to do, Chris?
RX.
RX by
RX.
Isotope. Huh?
Yes, I work with RX on the daily, and I'm getting pretty darn good at it. But yeah, I like RX a lot. And it's one of those pieces of software that I think for most, it's very intimidating at first. I'm talking about sort of like the standalone, not just the modules, if you will, the plugins for specific tasks.
Right. For those that don't know, Isotope's RX comes when you purchase it with a standalone app that comes in various forms with depending on how much you spend on it. Will depend on how many modules you'll get with it. And when you're working within a DAW, those modules are individual plugins that you could use individually.
Yeah, it's costly, but damn, it's a time saver.
Oh, hell yeah.
What you can do with it is, I get floored a lot when I use some of the things that I can get rid of. It sounds like an ad here now, but it really isn't. But it's such a great tool. I know I mentioned in the past there was an offering from Steinberg that I still haven't tried, but it looked very, very intriguing. But I own RX and I use it all the time. So that is always my go-to when I deal with those.
I'm right there with you on that. I also own the full-blown mega version, whatever it is called, of Isotope RX, the advanced everything that it has.
That's the way I like to look at things too. It's like the advanced everything.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, it's good. It really, really is good.
Yes.
And you can get rid of all the little things that we've talked about. And we could probably spend a series of podcasts talking about just that app, which we probably won't because it would be very
bore
technical.
The living pieces out of everybody.
Right. But let's say, working with RX, we can either use sort of like these modules that you mentioned, right? Because even if you're working with a standalone app, do you tend to work those and just kind of go for settings in there, or do you like to do the manual thing?
The answer to the question is I will play around with the automated version that attempts to give you some sort of stepping off point of something that it could do to fix whatever noise problem it is that you're choosing. And they do have a plethora of different modules in the complete full-blown version, from breaths, ironically enough, declicking of the mouth, string noise on guitar, hum, and the various different versions of hum that you can get, spectral denoise, which allows you to create.
That's the big one.
Oh, that's the masterful thing right there. They also have a vocal version of the spectral denoise. I don't tend to ever use it, though. There's derustle, there's deplosive, there's all kinds of things that it has in there that you can use. Generally speaking, I find that it's much better to just manually start grabbing the knobs and twisting. The automated stuff, to me, still leaves a fair amount of things to be desired. That being said, I have a test case piece of audio that every time they update this particular app that I use to try the automated service. On the last update for RX, it got pretty darn close to being something where it was like, damn, the automated version just about works now. So I think in the next iteration or two of RX with that particular file, it's going to be to a point where maybe the automated check this out and tell me what you think it needs in order to get rid of whatever junk there is. It'll be able to do it without me having to grab knobs manually.
The file that you're talking about, if it's the one that I think you're talking about, it's a nightmare case.
Oh, it's definitely a nightmare case.
Yeah.
It's a micro cassette recording of an interview between two people that are probably 5 feet away from the micro cassette recorder.
Yeah, no, I've heard that. And
it's noisy,
if
it's muffled, it's awful.
But even if it's not that, right? Because I tend to happen in the manual edit when I remove noise and things. I like to go in and listen, and the cool thing is that the way it works, you obviously have a visual representation of what it sees as audio.
When you're working within the standalone app.
Correct. Right. Doing that has great benefits, right? And you can see certain things that, are problematic in certain frequencies. Now, we always say, of course, you shouldn't mix or do anything with your eyes. You should do it with your ears.
Sure.
But it is a really good tool because chances are if you're sitting there and you're getting a little fatigued or whatever, and you see something in the audio, if you really own in on that, you're like, God damn it, yeah, there is something there. So you can actually go ahead and fix those things. But the big one that I use a lot as well is, as you mentioned, the spectral denoise.
Yep.
If you have that situation where you've recorded something and there's perhaps like an AC going on in the background, if you have some gaps, you can take a snapshot of that sound and then it will remove it from the audio file depending on the settings that you give it. I mean, it is how aggressive for it to be. It's really easy to overdo. That's a roundabout way for me of saying that I like to do it manually. As I'm doing that. It's a little bit more time consuming, but I find that you get
a cleaner cut, so to speak, a cleaner wipeout of the noise. for my own recent use cases in a lot of these remixes that I've been doing in the past 6 to 8 months, there were instances where there was hum from the guitar that was not intended to be there in the original recording. De-hum. Take a snapshot of that hum and bye-bye hum. It's like almost magically removed from the recording. There's another instance of a click track being heard in the background. You can go in and with the standalone app, as you were saying, you can see what the click looks like and go in and brush that right out. And it retains a lot of the noise, provided that you don't go too far into the editing of the actual harmonics and melodic value of the instrument that you're attempting to remove a click from. It does a fantastic job of that. And it's time consuming, but then you get superior clean audio, which helps for your mix.
Yeah. And I'll touch on it a little bit later, but let's say that we don't have RX. Obviously, there are things that we can do in our DAW. We can't necessarily go in on a microscopic level like you can with a program like RX. Let's say that we're dealing with those breaths, right? If it's an annoying thing, do you tend to cut that out of the region? Do you do a destructive edit on those? How are you dealing with those?
Get prepared to raise a glass because it depends. Is the answer. Sometimes I want it gone. If I do that, I'm going to highlight the audio of where that is located inside the region editor of the DAW and hit delete and make it go completely away. There are other times when you still want it, you just don't want it nearly as prominent. And in that case, I'm going to highlight that area and I'm going to change the gain value and reduce the gain as much as I deem necessary to make it less annoying. I'm assuming you do the same thing.
Yes. You're doing this as Logic Still. You're writing DAW, so you're doing that in the Logic sample editor, where you basically go in and destructively change the gain something. So,
and the same can be done in any other DAW, such as Cubase or Pro Tools or Studio One.
Yeah. One thing that we can do because it can be a little bit intimidating when you get the warning and it's like, this is you can't undo this.
Make sure you want to do it right. Copy the file before you do it.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, you can do that if you're feeling a little bit unsure of how hard you should go at this. It's not that dangerous. I mean, if you know what you're kind of doing and what you're aiming for, as long as you don't erase something that should be part of the performance, because then that would be most unfortunate.
Yes, it would.
When you're lowering breaths and things with gain, how much do you generally do that? I know that's content dependent.
It is. It's to taste. And I usually do it in small increments to start to see if it doesn't need a lot. And
a couple of dB at the time? Maybe?
Yeah, maybe 1, 2 dB. And if it's still not enough, then I reduce the amount of reduction, so to speak, the next time. So if the first one's 2, I might reduce it 1. If that's still not enough, I might reduce it another 1. Or if it starts to feel like it's too far, I can undo that before I totally go destructive and reduce it half a dB or something. As I get closer to the value that I want, I start reducing how much I'm reducing.
Got it. Right. Crystal clear.
Yes.
Yeah. The question might be then why don't I just use automation for this? At this point, for me, and I know you're in this camp as well, when I'm prepping files for a mix, I don't want to be writing automation.
No.
And you certainly don't want to leave this to the mix phase as well. I mean, sometimes you don't have a choice when it's like, okay, you discover things as you're mixing, but I would still use the same process of destructive editing at that point. So just kind of like using automation to lower breaths it's a clunky one and one that I know I wouldn't recommend.
Right. So how much noise removal is appropriate to you?
Ooh, I tend to be very sort of like neurotic about those things. In a perfect world, I'd like nothing to be there, but that's not good either because you mentioned with the breaths and things, that does add some humanity to it. It's very easy for me to overdo and get just completely into the weeds of things. I would say if it's something that that it's going to be there and it's going to bother you every time you hear the song, get rid of it.
Yeah.
Or remove it or lower the gain or whatever method that you choose to use in this matter.
Mm-hmm.
But it is really easy for me to overdo. What about you? Do you have sort of like a rule that you try to stick with?
It's interesting. In some recent Atmos mixes, I'm noticing noise more often than I did in the stereo version of the mix.
Mm.
And I'm finding myself in the Atmos version having to mute tracks when they are not going. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that it's in a stereo mix. There's so much going on in the two channels. You don't tend to notice the noise as much. But when it's in an Atmos mix and things are a lot more individualized, whew, little things really start to stand out. So you have to be a bit more diligent about it. And as you might agree, it's real easy to lose sight and miss some noises unless you're being really anal about that shit. Pun intended.
Right. But it's also one of those things that it actually depends on the artist and the music that you're doing too.
It does, yeah.
I can't remember the song now, but I was watching a documentary about one of my favorite players, David Gilmour from Pink Floyd. He was working on one of his solo albums, and there's a lot of noise going on in the background of the track. It's kind of sparse thing going on, and you can hear people talking, and there's rumble and noise and things. And by his career, by who he is, it's like Pink Floyd. We're like, oh, that's kind of cool. That's kind of esoteric or whatever. But it turns out that it was just he was recording a demo guitar that he really couldn't match the emotion or the performance of later. So he just kept that demo, and what the noise was is basically his wife doing the dishes in the background talking to their kids.
Nice.
So, but most of us aren't cool enough to be able to get away with that.
Sure.
So, you have to do that. But at the same time, if you're receiving files from somebody else to mix, that's what you get to work with.
Well, it's like, also a question that you should be asking the artist or whoever's sending you this mix. Do you want this noise removed? Because maybe they want that in there, and if they want it in there, you don't touch it.
Right. Well, let's say that there's a vocal that goes on and there's a door slam happening. Well, then that's the take that you have to work with. So it's like you make the best of what it's there. You're probably not going to remove it 100%. Hey, the song must go on or something.
And other things that must go on are our Friday finds. Chris, what have you got for us this week?
I got some music this week. I am a guitar player. I'm into guitar players that do cool stuff. If you're like me, you might be aware of a guy called Andy Wood, who is a session player, and he does some great stuff online. And it would be a disservice if you think of him as he's just an Instagram guitar player, because he's certainly not that. Andy Wood just came out with an album, again, another album this past week called Charisma. Besides just the razor guitar playing that you would expect from him, it's really good compositions.
Nice.
And I think that for me, growing up, with the shrapnel era of guitar players, where a lot of times, the composition might have left a little bit to be desired. It was shred fest going on. This is certainly not it. Andy Wood's Charisma is my Friday find for this week. And what about you, Jody? What do you got?
I'm sticking with your guitar theme here, and I'm going to talk a brief moment about a brand new effects pedal, or rather an amp pedal by UAFX, Universal Audio's effects lines, and it is called the Anti-1992. And the idea of this particular unit is it is a amp in a box kind of thing, in a stomp box. It is a take on the modern metal classic amp of the PV 5150, obviously inspired by Mr. Eddie Van Halen, but also 1992 happens to represent the year that death metal really became a raging force in the music industry. This pedal is obviously dedicated to that kind of tone, and if that's what you're looking for, the Anti-1992 is your box of choice.
Woohoo! Metal.
Hey, while we've got your attention, we ask that you go to InsideTheRecordingStudio.com and sign up for our mailing list. You'll need to be on our email list in order to be eligible for any future giveaways, and we'll make sure you don't miss any future episodes of this insane podcast. Send us an email at goldstar, GOLDSTAR, at InsideTheRecordingStudio.com with the word clean, and you'll get something cool back in your inbox. With that, I'll say see you next week.
Talk to you later, Jody. Thanks for listening, people.